So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Again, just some housekeeping items as we hit the top of the hour this morning. My name is Taylor Cardin. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We have some industry leaders we'll be hearing from. We'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question, please feel free to send it through the Q&A channel at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering your questions at the end of today's session. And today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible by registering on the XIQ website. Lastly, we'd encourage you all to share this webinar on your social networks. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. Today we have Eric Stavola as our guest. Eric is an expert in storytelling, combining his master's in information systems and master's in education, specializing in coaching to create organizational results. With a unique ability and techniques to drive business performance and revenue growth at multiple levels within and for organizations, Eric has successfully spearheaded significant transformation programs supporting commercial and strategic objectives. He's experienced in translating complex business issues into high-performance solutions, increasing profits and results. Eric is a dedicated thought leader who is passionate about creating meaningful, impactful changes for organizations. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate to be here and appreciate the time.
Also with me is Usman Sheikh, the founder and CEO of XIQ. Prior to founding XIQ, Usman served in several vice president roles with global responsibility at SAP, including sales enablement and digital commerce. He's a regular lecturer at leading U.S. business schools on how AI is transforming B2B sales. Welcome, Usman.
Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Taylor, for inviting me.
So Usman, today we're going to be talking about the importance of storytelling. Why don't you kick us off?
Yes, and good morning, Eric. Nice to have you on our webinar today.
Usman, thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Exactly. So great topic. You know, a lot has changed over the last 2.5 years. The pandemic was, some say, more likely a catalyst in bringing about change and speeding up change. We know that, you know, there's been a great attrition going on. Almost 57 million people have left their jobs and gotten new jobs. That's a big number. And everything, because we were not able to meet in person, has moved to digital channels. And on these digital channels, there's a lot of noise now. I get a lot of emails, I get a lot of LinkedIn messages, requests. It's very difficult to hear from, you know, the signal from the noise. It's really difficult to do that. So today we invited Eric. Eric, just to let the audience know, we came to our attention when he unsolicited created a video on XIQ telling the XIQ story, and we were so impressed that we've actually turned that video into one of our infomercials. And we said, this is really, really great. You know, Eric really stood out when he took material that we had out on the internet and in the public domain, and he created this storyline that was very, very compelling. So he said, look, this is really interesting. So we called up Eric, hey, who are you? What do you do? And he started telling us about business storytelling. We said, look, this is a great topic. And he even told us that he had used our platform to gain insights about us in creating this story. So we invited Eric over and, you know, to hear and kind of share his wisdom. He's a sales coach. He's a master storyteller, and he should be able to tell us what is storytelling all about and how to actually construct and build your story. Today, agenda slide, please. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. The change, you know, Eric, I'm going to ask you, like, how is change from your vantage point? Really, what do you see in terms of all this business change that's taking place? And resilience, you know, a must-have skill or a character capability that one needs to have to be able to survive these times. And then we talk a little bit about how do you use storytelling to become relevant? And companies that are not really adapting to this change have in the past suffered, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Establishing context, you know, you get a lot of noise out there and there's no context in how people are reaching out to you. So how do we establish contact? And eventually, the new way of describing And getting your business case across is by telling a story. And storytelling is nothing new. This has existed since dawn of man, right? So, and then lastly, we're going to actually get into the weeds and start showing you how to construct a story powered by XIQ. So with that said, let's move on to the first slide, please, Aitisham. So Eric, there's been a lot of transformation, right? 41% of the workforce has changed, moved jobs. 57 million people have changed jobs. As I said, there's potentially exhaustion. We had Dr. Dover on our webinar last time, and he mentioned that exhaustion has really set in because of how people are going to work 24/7 and working from home, working remote, not being able to distinguish between when is the start time and when is the stop time. So tell us, Eric, from your vantage point as a sales coach and an industry strategist, how do you see this transformation and what is the impact that you see emerging? What are some of the key trends?
I think it's understanding like what change looks like. And I think first change is not this linear process anymore. It's happening exponential, right? We don't think it's going to, hey, step 1, step 2, it's 1, 5, 15. And before you know it, things are happening at speeds and heightened expectations that we're really not prepped for. It's amazing to me about the demand for our presence. I find it funny if you're on these, it's literally called your presence. And it used to be that I have to be available via phone. Now it's email is overwhelming, but now it's an IM, it's chat, I have all this noise coming at me. I am exhausted. I mean, I really am get exhausted, and I don't feel like I'm any different than other people. And so I think it made me start thinking, this is not going to slow down. So how can I filter this noise into information that I can act upon, to really get something that I can act upon? But then more importantly, how can I take the information that I get at light speed and be able to apply it or retain it as we move forward? And so I think that part of this is something where this, not only from a resiliency standpoint individually, but also how do you gather and get everything in alignment from a storytelling standpoint. And then lastly, I think that current state, I use this term current state, but that seems to be changing drastically. It used to be that businesses change every 90 days. I think that that's now, honestly, with every month, there's some major implication. And I believe there's a ripple effect to business, but also in the concept of sales. I think today work is an experience. It's become emotional, it's become physical, it's become technological, but more than anything, it needs to be purposeful. And I think that's where this, 41% of the global workforce is saying, rethinking, even from a standpoint of their own vocation.
Yeah. And on the other side, the buyers, their expectations have changed. Say their buying motions and behavior have changed, right? There's heightened expectations. We see that only 5% are interacting. They're doing a lot of online research. They're coming a lot more prepared when they start talking to salespeople. And therefore, I would imagine that, there's a need for salespeople to really be able to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, the buyer is way more intelligent. And we constantly think that this pandemic is what's really shifting the landscape, especially in sales. But I think it happened well before then. I think the internet made a huge difference in B2B sales. The internet shifted this standpoint where the buyer has more information. The buyer has a lot of their need. And slowly it started getting where from a sales standpoint, we were providing information or could really persuade, to now today, we need to provide proof versus that more of that persuasion, so to speak. I also think where we used to maybe want to challenge, now it's more about educating and interpreting this noise from that standpoint. But I also think since the buyer now is way more intelligent, it starts to change their expectations of what they want from from us. So this concept of shallow selling or hey, just get your attention, but then there's no depth behind it. There's no alignment in what you're connecting with, really falls short. So the customer wants a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's really, really annoying when salespeople call you up nowadays or write to you on LinkedIn, and then they start asking you these questions. And my knee-jerk reaction is, why haven't you done the research? I mean, if you know me and you're asking me questions, you should first of all realize that we've built a platform that actually helps salespeople get a better understanding of the person and the company that they're going to be talking to. So why haven't you done the research, right? So that's my baseline understanding these days. And it's really annoying when some of these salespeople call up and start asking you all these questions, which the answers they should know of already, right? Great. And organizations have also started reshaping themselves, correct?
Agreed. I think, you say research, I think it starts with just, if the buyer's more intelligent and because of we talk about change, the first is do you have empathy for that buyer? And can you be a little bit more curious, is the way I like to say it, by curiosity of what's important to them? How are they going to define things? How are they going to measure things? And let that kind of spearhead into where and how you can align to not necessarily sell with them, but start engaging with them at a different level.
Yeah. So let's move to the next slide, please, if you don't mind. And yeah, so again, that kind of really nicely segues into, are you relevant, right? How do you establish your relevance? What are some of your tips, and what are some of your thoughts and wisdom about getting relevant?
This one's hard for me. I think sometimes what's more powerful than having all the answers is asking more deepful questions, especially of yourself, but then taking those questions and what's the ripple effect to that? Point being, are you relevant today? The studies show that we spend 5% of our time in front of this client. So how can we spend more time or be much more relevant? I think obviously, very quickly now. So if you think about the short amount of time in sales today, you have to get their attention, establish a level of trust, immediately understand their priorities, and then be able to connect the dots with your product, service, or offering. You have to do that very quickly and efficiently. So, how and what can you do in that aspect? So for me, I think how you approach the customer starts to be a lot more important than actual what you're selling the customer. Not lip service. It's really about being strategic in, how can I engage at a different level that is more, emotionally connecting, but then once I have that attention, logically reason with them of why we're together. You were telling me a story I thought was great, that someone drafted a great email to you, really caught your attention, right? Just emotionally connected, whether it's through words or anything else. But then you wanted more depth after that. You're willing to invest more time and just fell short. I just think that is kind of the reality of what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, and the buyers, being more prepared, they're doing a lot of research, right? So they're spending that window of time that they're spending with salespeople, it's mostly to get validated, right? It's mostly to find out all this research we've done. Is it correct? Can you guide us to the right answer? And if we spend that short window of time, that 5% of the total buying journey that a buyer is spending with a seller, in asking questions, we're going to lose their attention. We're going to lose their respect as well, right? So tell us a little bit about, in this time, this is kind of a high stress environment. And I would imagine resilience plays a big role in helping you kind of stay focused on the goal at hand, which is to be able to communicate the message and be able to stand out from the crowd, be prepared so that you can utilize that 5% of the overlap that you're going to have with your potential buyer in a better way, right?
Completely agree. So, I always think a certain stages. First, we talked about being very curious. The second is how can you quickly, establish a level of trust at multiple levels, right? Being consistent, in your approach with the right character, right competence, then it's really about establishing how can you educate or kind of quiet the noise, meaning filter out some of the things to really come alongside them to educate. And I think the last thing that customers want today in this heightened expectation is a level of vulnerability. Honestly, is a level of vulnerability. And what does that look like in a complex sale? That looks like, by capability alone, let's have a conversation. And in that conversation, is there a business case where it makes sense for us to do business or not? And to have that authenticity or vulnerability to say, hey, listen, I don't think we're there right now. But what you're doing is kind of co-collaborating to do what? To build this business case accordingly. Because I think what's happening is, because of how fast business is going, sometimes we don't even know what the pain is yet, but we want the resources to come alongside and let's figure it out together. And I think this heightened expectation is what's really needed. Real quick, I'll give you a real life story. This happened 5 years ago. Had a customer said, you want to be relevant? Come spend a day in a Kaizen event, and you're going to fix our problem, not with your product or service, but with your experience and your method. And by the way, I want you to work with one of your competitors, and you're going to work with our team. And at the end of the day, we're going to have our CIO come in, present as a team. And if he says yes, then we'll go out to bid, but only the two of you. I thought that was so profound. And this was 5 years ago. It really started resonating. It planted a seed that day that this is the way we're going. This is really where this heightened expectation, this need to quiet the noise and take a journey together to build out a very emotional, logical, but also clear pathway to a business case is coming. And what better way to do that than through a story, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And by doing that shared experience where you collaborated, went on site and understood that helped you build the empathy and understand exactly what were some of the pain points that these your prospects are actually facing, your prospective buyers are actually facing.
Totally agree. And I think this is where we talk about current state, but if that's always changing, right? You have current state. I always define current state impacting what's impacting the business 0 to 90 days, then outcome 12 to 18 months. Now I know that at enterprise level, wait a minute, Eric, we got to go 2 to 3 years out. Look, things are happening so drastically. I see those roadmaps shrinking with our customers. So we have to be very phased in our approach. This is the concept, what I think of context. So to me, it's about how can I start rethinking things to be able to pivot, adjust, adapt, and then eventually overcome. And I think this is where rethinking some strategies in how we approach the customer, how we engage and collaborate with the client, but also the tools and methods we use to do that as well.
Yeah, and so we have this adjust, adapt, and overcome. And I think you talk about change, and companies that have not really, embraced change have become obsolete really fast. And with this extremely fast rate of change that we are experiencing right now, I would venture to say that in looking at your sales practices, how we've been going to market, how we've been presenting ourselves to those clients, how have we been utilizing the 5% of the time that we have with the buyers has to be a major change driver. So adjust, adapt, overcome. We talked about it when we were preparing in terms of how companies have really become obsolete. And we talked about the blockbuster versus Netflix. Tell us a little bit about that. What are you seeing in terms of how, what is the urgency to change, right?
Well, look at the story there, right? Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix, but thought they were being, innovative because they're sending, DVDs to clients' house. And cut to the chase, how can one organization just completely go out of business? The other one is thriving today. And if you're going to be very tactical, they both sell the same thing. It's how they're delivering that. It's the experience and the approach that they took, and then letting the ripple effect happen from that. And I think for me, I look at this to say, how does that apply to what I'm doing? How does that apply in our engagement? And this is where we constantly talk about this concept of transformation, but it's really about how we apply to certain aspects. So we embrace what we've done well, but what do we want to adjust? how do we want to apply that, and then effectively move forward from that standpoint.
Yeah, and so when we take that and apply that to the sales profession, right? It's more important in terms of, you mentioned that how you approach versus what you're selling, right? So it's about that approach, and I think you use the word authenticity. That has to come across, right? And in order for authenticity to come across, preparation has to take place, right? You have to really understand your target audience, who you're addressing, and that's how you become authentic. And that's the example you were citing, that your client asked you to come on site, spend a day with them, so you could be more authentic, right?
Agreed. And then so you accumulate when you get that time, right? If you get that time, you start accumulating all these data points. And what happens to us is we're constantly getting data points, not in necessarily the right context or in an easy digestible format. And I think that if we go back to how we started this conversation with how fast things are going, and then all the information, it's said that an average person takes on 34 like gigabytes of information a day. That's extreme. We have to make 35,000 decisions every day. Like how can you filter that noise and make it something that not only is acceptable to me, but then can travel well? And to me, that's where I think business storytelling comes in, to not only emotionally connect, but then start to logically reason of why you should do business, and then start clearly stating the business case. But that needs to speak on its own and almost travel accordingly, especially in a complex sale where there's multiple buyers and you're not going to get in front of all those people. What I laugh is that we spend a lot of time educating a champion, then we expect that champion to really tell that story when heck, it's hard for us to tell a story. How can you package that nicely where we have empathy for our champion to make it simple for that to move forward? And I think that is kind of this concept of storytelling.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love the fact that you mentioned 35,000 decisions a day. That's ridiculous, So if somebody really needs to stand out and get your attention, you need to be able to compete with 35,000 decisions that those people are making in a day. And so yeah, so I think let's move forward a little bit. So tell us a little bit, Eric, in terms of how do we establish, what is the first step that we should do in establishing context?
So I think in context, I just think of really three aspects, and this is like phases. So for me, changing an approach, it's not necessarily selling, but it's about how we engage. And I think the first engagement is, how do we capture someone's attention today? We literally and figuratively are walking around in this cognitive tunnel, just out of building a resilience of quieting the noise. And so social media today really has taught us that to get someone's attention, you got to either entertain, inspire, or educate from that standpoint. Now that's going to emotionally connect for a short period of time, just a very short, like just get, okay, I'm going to focus on this. And then how can I then move over into a logical way of why we should meet, where and why are you contacting me from this standpoint? And then I think it's about, what's the outcome that comes through this? So I almost view this, that the first is get their attention, right? How do we do that? To me, make sure that your story is either entertaining, inspiring, or educational. And then, be clear on the next step. I always laugh that when someone connects with you on LinkedIn, the immediate, like I almost don't want to connect, because then the immediate thing is going to be, this direct ask of a result, an outcome. And I think we completely bypass how are we going to align and collaborate. And I think this is what I call context, but it's really phasing things out. And there's a story to actually get to each one of these from that standpoint.
Yeah, and it's very important. I think you just said that, we have multiple decision makers. As salespeople, we're not going to meet all of them. So we have to take our champions and prep them so they can be advocates for our product and our solution. So, and storytelling is something that stays with people. I think in our prep, you were mentioning how people remember movies, right? How they remember good books, how they remember stories that their grandmother potentially told them. And it's very easy, if we look at the whole idea of storytelling, it's something that has, that passes generation through generation. So we have proof points over there that actually, by using storytelling as a technique, you can communicate to your champion and then enable them and empower them to be able to go further into the organization and retell the story as if you would, right? And in that, what I hear you saying is that context is the first step in helping you establish what that storyline is going to be. Would that be correct?
Completely agree. But I want to be crystal clear. I'm not talking about some rhetoric or some fable or stories of a movie line, right? I'm talking about performing better. And as a coach on the football field, right, performance is potential minus interference. So how do we minimize those interferences? We've already talked about them. So I think in a complex sale today, there's 3 stories that you need to tell really effectively in the right context from what you're saying. There's a business story, right? What are those customers' priorities? How are they defining those priorities? How are they going to measure it? And what's the impact or what would be the return, right? Then there's the sales story, meaning, why are you different in that aspect? And how do you align to that key area? And then it really is this technical aspect, right? How is technology going to really apply in this environment and really affect that moving forward? To me, if I'm running a team, I always, like, if we're talking about a deal, like, hey, tell me the business story, technical story, sales story. Let's hear it. And if that's not clear and in alignment, we're not going to go very far, especially in the complexities and the way that your potential deal has to travel internally within an organization.
Yeah, that's very important that, it has to travel within an organization. I think those are key words to mark over there. But expand a little bit more. What is the difference between a business story, a sales story, and a technical story? Help me and help the audience understand a little bit about what are those 3 stories.
So I think it's a business story is what are we solving for? And I think that, what is important to that organization? How are they defining it? How are they measuring it? And as trivial as that seems, I've sit in front of a lot of leaders, chief innovation officer, chief transformation officer. First question I'm asking is, hey, just to put this in the right context, how are you defining innovation? How are you defining, it's in their title. They laugh and go like, hey, we're still figuring out. I went to a conference and said, hey, what are key KPIs or benchmarks in your transformation? Got crickets. And I think we need to make sure to not settle for awareness, right? Awareness plus action equals understanding. We have to really understand what is we're solving for in that business level. How are you going to define it? How are you going to measure it? To me, I think that is the business story. Then what's the alignment with you in sales? I look at any customer and they're going to tell you why I can get your product cheaper, faster, better somewhere else. Why am I going to work with you? And in that answer, you're going to start to find really the alignment and where you can provide distinct value. And if you can't, qualify yourself out because I promise you'll at least earn credibility moving down the road. And I think the moment we went to a hybrid sales, in general, technology impacts us every single day. And so it's this ripple effect that comes in. So whether it's your product that you sell, or it's how your customer is going to leverage technology to adapt or adjust to what you're saying, or lastly, it's kind of like how are you going to engage in a sales process leveraging new technologies? I think that comes into play. So there's a lot to this, Usman, and from here. So just trying to break this out conceptually, this to me is when you wrap all this in the right alignment in a very clear and concise fashion, in a way that is engaging, but also very logical and clearly, depicts this. To me, that's a business and that's a business storytelling right there. That's a story that's effective in business.
And if I pick on what you just said, that they don't necessarily know their own business story, right? They don't know how to define that. And that's a great opportunity for salespeople to come in, do the research, help them figure out what their story is. And by doing so, you earn the trust of your prospective buyers and decision makers because you're actually solving problem number one, which is helping them define what their problem is and define what their opportunity is. And you're absolutely right. It is so often that we ask this question, tell us, a little bit about what are your key business challenges? What are you doing? And it's surprising how few people can actually answer those questions. And it seems like that would be, knowing that I have a headache would be the first thing I should be able to tell you. But not knowing this is very frequent. And so with the right tools and with the right amount of research and preparation and knowing how to tell the story, you can actually get into the mode of explaining like, this is the business, identifying and aligning the sales and the technology together. And really, when you put these three things together, that's really when you start defining the business value or the business case, right? So where we have business case in the center of these three circles, business value, that's really your business case. And the business case today has to be communicated not on Excel spreadsheets, but as a storyline. And that storyline that can actually travel across the organization.
I completely agree, because think about it. One of the things, especially in complex sales, is things get delayed, and then you have to start the process all over again. But if you could have a way to just like within a 3 to 5 minute time frame to quickly capture where we are current state, if you have to bring that back. But this is where taking the time, understanding the impact of where you're going. And I think where we started this, right, with how much information is coming at the average person, let alone a leader, from the standpoint, if you can start to articulate identify and articulate the customer's problem better than they can, to me, that starts to become real value. And not only be able to articulate that, but then provide distinct reasons why there's clear alignment between what it is that you're offering and the impact that it would, i.e. business value. And the way that you do that is by effectively aligning a business, a sales and technical story.
Yeah. And I am a real big show me kind of guy, right? And that's how you got our attention, is you showed us. And so what I'd like to do is kind of move into the next stage in how you build this, right? And this is the story, Eric, that you put this together in a 2-minute video for us and really got our attention. And what I'd like to do is share that with our audience. And maybe then you help break it down and tell us how you actually think about putting this together. So let's run this and show that, how the story was put together, please.
Post-COVID, our sales landscape has transformed drastically, and we have to have new tools and new methods to really capture the buyer's attention, especially in a hybrid world.
Customer is about to have a very tough conversation with their CFO about your product. And the question isn't, are you ready for that conversation? The question is, are they ready for that conversation? Is your customer ready to go talk to their CFO about why they bought and why they continue to buy, subscribe, whatever, renew your platform, your tool, your product?
B2B sales and marketing is all about personalization. Sellers and marketeers need to connect with their prospects and buyers in a highly individualized manner. By combining proven behavioral science-based personality assessment methodologies with artificial intelligence, XIQ empowers B2B sellers to better understand buyers, what motivates them, and what drives their decisions.
So, Eric, what really, really amazed me about this was that you didn't produce any net new content. You took a lot of content that already existed out there. Two, you really, really told our story very well. And so I'm very curious to find out, like, how did you go about doing that? How did you get ready? You really caught my attention the first time you sent that over. And it was very rapidly. We had met, and then within a day or so, you had this video that was explaining the entire XIQ use case, framing the discussion, put it in context, making it very relevant. As I said, to the extent that we've made it into one of our little infomercial videos, right, that we use to explain what XIQ's value is to our clients. So maybe help us understand, how did you actually go about doing this?
So first, I mean, I think to put this under the stage of engagement, it's about catching your attention. So for me, what was important to you, and where I subtlety said, how can I either, educate, but also entertain you? And so by taking your own, what you have produced at XIQ and saying, hey, here's how I would just tell your story just a little differently. The other thing is leveraging your own, software to understand you as like, it has to be quick, to the point, and like if it was just me talking for longer than, quite frankly, 15 seconds, I would have lost you. So it has to be like really quick. And so for me, I just want to capture your attention, and in that, taking your own content and just by putting it in a different phased area or storyline, it tells a different end result if you think about it. And so it was able to get your attention. You go to the second stage, then it was about, hey, how can we start to collaborate together? So like, you contacted me, and if you do get their attention and tell a good story, when they contact you, how are you going to work differently with this client? And I think there was a question that I think is a really good question about, hey, if you're going to travel and there's multiple sellers, how do you create this common language, or a story may be interpreted differently? And I think this is part of when we're having multiple meetings in this collaboration stage, you start to identify some key words. And I think keywords we've used forever in SEO, optimization and online. Now, can we apply those keywords into what would resonate with these leaders? And what I like around the XIQ software is, in your workbench, you're able to post whatever people post on social media, but you break it out into, here's what they're talking about. And I think those are like some key words that are really interesting. You have to interpret that, but I think it allows areas that is important, and where we can create new activities and new engagement methods to start to collaborate differently. And then lastly, as you move.
Yeah, so before we go to the last one, let me just interject over here. So two things. You said, first of all, establishing that emotional resonance, right? What's going to inspire, what's going to get me excited, what's going to catch my attention. And you went and looked at the XIQ profile to understand that this is my particular target audience. What is, in the 15 seconds, that's perfect. I'm a driver personality. I have a low attention span, right? And therefore, if you don't get my attention in 15 seconds or 30 seconds, you've lost me. And that's just about right. And you took that from there and you kind of fashioned your whole presentation around that. Secondly, what I hear you saying is that in order to come across as collaborative and establish that collaboration, you use the product, the XIQ workbench, to understand, again, what is this person actually talking about, right? And our platform has basically distilled what people are talking about on social media and brought out what is commonly known in the industry as first-party intent data. I don't like these big labels, but it's actually keywords and topics that are of interest to an individual or a company. And knowing that up front, and knowing how that person is going to react and consume that information, basically you started giving you a leg up in terms of how you're going to establish context, how are you going to become relevant to me? How are you going to speak that language? And to answer the question that was out there, if I may add to that, that's what you do. You can put in our platform these people into different buying groups, and you can identify and really start building out that one-to-one communication strategy based on their personality, how they like to be communicated to, and then what are the topics that they're interested to about, right? And so now I'm having a conversation with each individual in a manner knowing that these are the different decision makers, and I am able to tell a story that will resonate at an emotional level as well as from a context perspective with each one of them.
And this goes back to the business story. So you asked me, hey, Eric, get in a little bit of business and sales story. And this is exactly where you can just start developing that business and sales story. And what I mean by here is in some of those key words that they're using or in these wording, how are they defining success? What are some new KPIs you're trying to achieve? And what really interests me is that's an unknown for a lot of these individuals. So if you can start to so now what I do is I use that information to maybe start capturing other other individuals in that organization to start better understanding what it is they're solving for, and then aligning and determining what those KPIs may be. And in that, you kind of create this common language, which then wraps into a story that would also help travel better internally with multiple different decision makers as you walk through. Maybe too granular, Usman, but I mean, there's meat behind this from that standpoint.
There's a lot of meat behind that, and we've got proven results out of this, right? And so this is the future, I think, that, we're done with sales pitching. We're done with, the different methodologies that rely on helping people try to understand people, what kind of personality types they are. And we have frameworks, we have platforms now that can help you cut through the noise and actually get to the meat of the issue and really start talking to individuals. Because you have that limited time, right? You need to be very precise, and you need to be very contextual, and you need to be extremely relevant, right? So tell us, what are some of the outcomes, if you can, what are some of the outcomes that we can expect from storytelling?
So I think some of the outcomes is be very open and be very intentional about what it is that you want. So for me, if I engage and I capture someone's attention, even though they may not be in a buying line or anything else, one of the outcomes I may want is to glean current state relevant information from that leader in a conversation or how or where we can align. I almost view this outcome by first step is attention. Now follow me, I don't want to lose any salespeople on this, but for attention, you got to take your product and service, clients' money off the table. What's left? What assets are left? And in that alignment where those assets that align, you will find better ways to capture an attention and engage, and better ways to collaborate. And then once you start collaborating, you'll start to uncover more real data that you can start to use where, oh, wait a minute, we can solve this over here, to then start building an outcome. So each one of these contextual phases is an outcome to lead me to the next level that's moving up. And the way that you have to articulate all this information that you're going to gather in this journey is by being very clear and concise and putting it in a way that will resonate with people, i.e. a business story.
So let me ask you this one question before we start taking questions from the audience. Is this storytelling something that anybody can learn? How difficult is it to wrap my head around being able to move from my traditional sales pitch into being able to tell a story? And who does it?
Everybody has it. Everybody has their own personal story, and then there's a professional story. And I think the first thing that you can start doing individually, if you take one thing away, flip on your camera and keep anyone's attention talking about anything for a minute, just a minute. There's going to be so much you learn by doing that. Then once you do that, right, take a next level to say, okay, how can I align this with my product or portfolio? How can I do that better? And then take it a step further above to say, okay, when I be very curious about who you're going after, and then what's important to them, how do they define it, how are they measuring it, and then where can you help in that process? And I think that allows you to really start engaging. So really, I think that it's not so much about selling, so to speak. We spend 5% of the time, but it's really about engaging to get more time together. And I think when you start doing that, you get better results in the end.
Right. And folks, we're taking questions. Taylor, if you want to maybe start asking. So I think, thanks a lot, Eric. I think that was an extremely valuable tip, just to, kind of record yourself for about a minute and see if somebody's there to listen to you, right? If you can get that message across. And I think, I always like to go back and see my recordings, right? I learned so much from that. And especially in this time where we're living on the camera, we're communicating on the camera, we're not meeting physically, just learning the ability on how you present yourself across this media is very, very important, right? And nothing better than just being able to, we're living in the TikTok selfie culture, right? And so being able to go back and record yourself should be fairly natural these days. But it is so important from a business perspective to be able to see how you come across.
It's humbling, Usman. Yeah, I talk to leaders that are exceptional at what they do, and they're like, it's uncomfortable. And the reason it's uncomfortable is that you got to do it. Just rep and repeat. Get over that. By being. I think part of building resiliency is start to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, and don't allow your story to be stolen from you. Things that you've done exceptionally well, now you have to do them in new ways, using new technologies to be able to apply and resonate at a really impactful level. And I think today you have an opportunity to do that at scale, but just don't get left behind from that standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one other question I just want to bring up again is those multiple decision makers, Usman. So they don't perceive the story the same way. So how should you really align your storyline so it reaches the emotional level of every decision maker involved? Like, how is that possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we tried to address it, but let me go back to it again. So first of all, understanding the personality type of the different decision makers, right? And identifying who those are, right? There's multiple ways you can do that. You can do that by doing your simple prospecting, or knowing the organization a little bit better, or simply people that you've been communicating with, and that you found out through talking to different people in the organization who are going to be those key decisions. And then being able to identify, using our platform, for example, to understand what are their personalities, how to actually communicate and build relations. And this is that emotional quotient, the EQ part of this, super important. Intuitively, a lot of salespeople know that this is what they need to do, but then they fall short because they don't tend to do the homework that's necessary to really understand the person. And again, the barrier of Zoom and video, is further distancing us from being able to identify who these people are. So building those individuals into a buyer committee, identifying who they are in terms of, are they doers? Are they coaches? Are they going to be blockers? Right there, it starts taking you a whole lot further in trying to see who's your champion and how you need to get them prepared to communicate to the key decision makers, because you're not going to be in the room when that discussion takes place, right? So your story, as Eric said, has to move across. And if we know the mental makeup of the buying committee, the personality types within the buying committee, we can custom tailor our message very easily to be able to address those people, and then coach or tell that story to our champion and enable them to be able to take it further. One thing I'd like to add, Eric, you were saying about, getting on the camera and, what a big shift this is. One of our clients told us that at the start of pandemic, a lot of seasoned sales guys, right, the top performers, they refused to do that, and they resigned because they said it was a demotion. They were now going into inside sales versus being an account executive, right? They didn't want to do this. And it was that discomfort of being in this medium that really, really kind of push them out and said, we're not going to do it. And on the other hand, there's a whole new generation that's emerging. Taylor is one of those individuals who's actually coming out of a professional sales training school where they teach you how to present yourself on media, right? And be very comfortable how to really manage the conversation over here. So Taylor, to answer your question, there are tools available that will help you understand who the different buyers are, the different decision makers, and really be, using the techniques that Eric is sharing with us, you can start building a story that will resonate at the emotional level with all of them, right? Eric, would you like to add something to that?
No, I just think that emotion will get attention, then logic is going to move you down, and then make sure that you're showing them that they're going to want to go somewhere with you. And so wherever that outcome may be, make sure that you're moving them, down that road from that standpoint. And I will say this one last piece: the multiple decision makers and the story will resonate differently. That's why it's very important to get the understanding of what are they solving for, how they define, how they measure it, even if it's at multiple levels. And then that will be packaged up completely to build that business and sales story to be in alignment at the end product. Usman, it's been fun. I really appreciate the conversation.
Definitely.
So do we want to take one last question, or?
Let's do it.
One last one. So one of them is, what helps you gain that understanding, but also how do you share your solution when that face time is so limited, when they're not spending as much time with their sellers?
For me, I would say this, that I always think of, there's so much alternative data that's out there, then it could be noise. How do I turn that into actionable intelligence? So I'm constantly looking to leverage technologies. XIQ does a great job in that from that standpoint. So I'm able to leverage technology to kind of, filter out some noise. But then when I get that information, leverage this medium in a different way. I think the buyer today wants more asynchronous messaging, meaning one-way messaging, meaning that, hey, send me information, but have empathy for them and know that they're probably going to review it on this mobile device. So how does that travel? Can it be viewed properly in a mobile device? And will it be clear and concise to their point where they'll capture it? And then, Taylor, something you talked about in the beginning about make it very convenient to be able to schedule something as a follow-up. I think all of that, to me, is encompassed in an effective story.
And speaking of follow-up, XIQ has their links to our website, as well as the webinars in the chat if you want to get a one-on-one call with us. And I want to thank Eric again. Thank you so much for this insight on an industry and one-to-one level. We really appreciate you having here. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Again, our links are in that chat, and this webinar will be available on demand, and we will send that to you after this call.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks for having me.